of life that seems to be speeding up, the pace of stress, the fact that we're always on our social media devices, we're always on our emails, this always on lifestyle, it seems to be taking quite a toll on our physical bodies, our mental health, and even our emotions right now. And what I'd like to maybe get some insight from Dr. Phil today, and as Dr. Phil knows that I've been, talking to him about my own health and also my family's health, and really how to sustain and maintain, a youthful look, maintain our longevity, and also keep those peak performances in terms of our mental clarity, our emotional well-being, and also our physical health. So today I'm very happy to welcome Phil Watkins. And Phil, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and share about yourself. We're very excited to learn about your concept of nutrition as a currency, the key nutrients that we need for our brain, and nutrition as it feeds, our brain and also offsets stress. So over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Margaret. I'd like to thank yourself and Axia for asking me to be a part of this, and thank you to everyone for attending this morning. My background is that I'm an Australian-trained naturopath. So for some people who may not know that term, basically I'm trained in the application of 3 different streams of natural medicine. So one of those is the application of herbal medicine. The other is the application of nutrition as a therapy, which can be a little bit different from maybe what we're talking about today, but I'll try and merge those. And I think the third stream is diet as a therapy or diet as a prescription. So they're the 3 main things that I've been trained in. I've been practicing now, I've been in private practice now for around 12 years. And my primary interests are, coming from a background in chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. My main interests now are anything to do with the digestion and the brain. And mainly, how to apply, natural medicine to kind of build on that little super highway there. But today, what we're going to talk about more than anything is some of the ways to potentially reframe nutrition in a way that looks more towards optimizing your lifestyle, or to a large extent actually trying to get better in some of the things that are already quite good but may need a little bit of work, but also give you hopefully a different way of looking at things in relation to why nutrition might be important for the next 2 or 3 decades. And we'll touch on a few bits and pieces as far as some practical tools, but also I want to look at some comparisons, because I think one of the interesting things about peak performance and optimization is actually more trying to get a sense of where your platform is now. And I think one of the interesting things about that is as we'll find, is that a lot of people, when they actually compare themselves to a baseline of what they're eating fruits and vegetables wise, just on a daily consumption, isn't necessarily at the optimized peak just yet. So when you're looking to kind of optimize something that isn't necessarily foundationally sound, then sometimes there's different places for you to start. So I'll touch on that as well. But look, let's get started. You mentioned nutrition as currency. I think that's probably where I'd love to start, to give people maybe a different frame in relation to why it's important, and especially as you touched on in our modern day. Nutrition as a currency is something that I've used to try and explain to people exactly why they need to keep up with their nutrition. And this is in a few different ways. So let's introduce it from a dietary perspective first. Now, one of the key things about the body is that nutrients, either macronutrients, so your protein, carbs, or fat, and your micronutrients, so things you would have heard of, so the B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin C, all of these things are generally used in quite a transactional basis within the body. So the body generally uses the micronutrients to pay for its transactions, for example, to convert glucose into energy or cellular ATP. People may have heard of ATP before. It's the energy within your cell. Now, for a lot of people, if you basically can't pay your bills in a social sense, then what can happen is that you have to basically in some way choose which bills you can and can't pay. So let's go back to some of the time where some of the people here, including myself, were students. If you had a particular amount of money to spend on your bills, let's say you had your internet, your rent, your electricity and your water bill to pay, you would often choose the bill that would be cut off first in order to, and then kind of work with that a little bit. And that's essentially what we're doing with our bodies when we don't have enough nutrition. So one of the key things is that your body actually has to go through what's called a triage system. So I'll use magnesium as a bit of an example of this, just to illustrate illustrate it a little bit more. So hypothetically, we could say that the body, if you're exercising 4 times a week, we could say the body would like to have around about 600 milligrams of magnesium a day. The average egg has about 6, just to give you a sense of scale. So let's say that 1 milligram of magnesium pays for 1 biochemical transaction within the body. Now, so that's 600 different biochemical reactions that 1 milligram of magnesium is paying for. Now, let's say the average person is around about 200 milligrams to around 150 milligrams down on magnesium on average in a Western country. So let's say that you've now got 150 transactions on a daily basis that your body has to decide which to pay and which not to pay. And this can actually leave you in a bit of a deficit in relation to which transactions get paid and over the longer term as well. So let's say that the same 150 transactions that don't get paid then over the course of 2 or 3 decades. And this is where, as we see in business, if you don't fund a department properly, or there's a group of transactions that don't get paid. So going back to our even simpler one, if you don't pay your internet, if you don't pay for your phone bill, over time, they're just going to get shut off. And this is where the nutritionist currency kind of comes in to give you a sense of, well, wait a minute, if I'm not giving my body enough money to pay its bills, then over a longer period of time, there's a good chance that the body's going to start to actually be forced to triage that a little bit and then shut down some of these processes over a longer period of time. So I want to build on that a little bit in relation to peak performance by offering to people that the average fruits and vegetable consumption in Canada specifically is only around about 4 to 5 serves of fruits and vegetables a day. Now, the recommended intake, and this was actually a public health initiative in Canada at around 2017. So this is around 3 years ago that this was begun as a broader public health initiative. The recommendations were getting up to around 8 to 9 serves, so almost double a day. So before we actually speak about peak performance and using nutrition and supplementation as in a way to kind of build on a foundation, I think a good practical tip to get started now with this new frame is how much money do you have in your wallet to get started? We always kind of talk about the more sophisticated elements, but if you are one of those people where you do a little bit of a diet diary and you say, well, wow, I'm only actually getting 3 or 4 fruits or vegetables a day, or in Hong Kong, would you believe the average is only 1 to 2 serves of fruits and vegetables a day, then it's going to be very difficult for you to jump up into this kind of peak or optimal place where your body's actually now spending excess money to really build your performance and things like that. So a practical term in relation to nutritionist currency is to actually do a little bit of a reality check, do a diet diary, or even just write down on a daily basis what you're having in a real sense as well. The average person will have some form of cereal-based breakfast with maybe 1 or 2 serves of fruit. Lunch can be maybe 1 serve of vegetables, like a lettuce or tomato in a sandwich. And then dinner will then, maybe have 1 or 2 vegetables with a serve of protein in it. in a sense, that's still, you know, maybe 3 to 5 serves a day. So it may really mean that the platform that you start when it comes to optimization may actually need to be foundational before you move to peak and optimization. As I said, you know, if you put your foot down on an average vehicle as opposed to an F1 vehicle, you know, you really need to make sure that the foundations within that mechanical complex is there. So I think looking at that, if you run out of money in your wallet, you'll go to the ATM and you'll go and withdraw some cash so that you have those resources to pay for public transport, go and buy yourself a coffee if you need to. So I want people to really start thinking about that in terms of nutrition. If your body's running out of money or your body's running out of resources, it basically, if you don't, you know, refill those resources through your diet, or in some cases for some people that can mean supplementation as well. If you don't do that, it's akin to just going, well, I'm only going to go to the cash machine tomorrow. I'm going to go to the cash machine in 72 hours. And then, you know, that's when I'm allowed to refill my resources. I think nutrition doesn't necessarily work like that. And I'd really like to just offer that as a key point for today, is that sometimes starting at the basics is really, really important.
So quick question for you there, Phil, is so say that people are getting, or maybe some of our children are not getting, you know, the proper serve of micronutrients through fruits and vegetables and so on. What would be some of the symptoms that would lead us to know that, you know, this is a serious issue? Is it, I guess some examples would be a really poor bowel movement, not being able to go to the washroom, maybe feeling very tired, or not being able to concentrate properly on homework or you know, work that we're doing in the office. What are some of the symptoms we should be looking out for?
Sure. For me, one of the key symptoms is I think, because I think a caveat to this answer would be that it is demographic oriented. So for women, you know, brain fog and shortness of breath and hair loss is a big iron symptom, and I always tend to test iron with women, you know, regardless. Because I think just even yesterday I had a case of a woman who was taking iron, and yet her iron levels were low and she was not really getting, you know, the types of things. So I think first of all, for women, definitely it's brain fog. I think for men, it's also a sense of just generalized fatigue. I think men generally feel like their emotional state gets a little bit shaky as well. And for kids, I think it does also come down to concentration and fatigue and a sense of listlessness. I think sometimes with kids, you can kind of tell if they're not running, and you know, they're not running around and doing their thing and offering a particular level of energy. I think, you know, there's often something that needs to be looked at. But I think looking to the brain as a broader symptom for everyone is possibly a good thing. Generally, what I recommend as a way to test that is, I always ask people a two-part question with that is, would you feel physically competent to run 400 meters? And regardless of the end game, would you, you know, if you forced to run, do you feel as if you could run? And most people can, which is great. The second one in relation to that symptom is, do you feel mentally competent to read a 2,000-word article? And this is really, really interesting, because you'll find a lot of the time the answer is no. People's attention is poor, their recall is poor. So in relation to your question about symptoms, I think you know, they're the big symptoms there to really look out for. As far as the key nutrients for them, for children, it's definitely DHA, a form of omega-3, so one of the components of fish oil. It's really, really important for a developing brain, and even in younger kids, you know, toddlers upwards. There's some really interesting research now about you know, cognitive development and DHA as well. So that would be my first choice. For adults, I think it comes a little bit more down to metabolic currency. So when I say metabolic currency, metabolism is building something up and breaking something down. So once again, this kind of comes back down to the transactional process. The body needs some resources or some workers to do these things. And I generally say that a B complex vitamin is the key to that, because the majority of people will feel that relatively quickly. And as a keynote for that, looking for a methylated B complex is very, very important. Unless you want to spend, a lot of money testing your DNA, people can have genetic predispositions to not dealing with B vitamins. So that's something that you do want to spend some money on with fish oil as well. The quality is really important with these things, but hopefully that answered your question.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. I'd just like to touch a little bit on the quality of the supplements, the quality of the fish oil, the quality of the vitamins, and so on. Because everybody, these supplements are available anywhere, from your drugstore brand right through to slightly more premium brands. Can you talk a little bit to just the quality of the supplements we're taking? Just like, we may choose to eat organic food or, grass-fed meat or not. And could you talk a little bit about vegan? Because not everyone's taking fish oil.
Yeah, for sure. No problem at all. So just the first part of that question, I'll use fish oil as an example. So with fish oil and the way that it's sourced, there's a purification and distillation process to clear heavy metals and other excipients or non-active ingredients, so to speak, from fish oil that's actually really expensive from a manufacturing point of view. So generally, this is why there can be quite a big kind of spectrum of price when it comes to fish oil, because obviously it's unfair of me to make accusations, but it's fair to say in my mind that if you've got a fish oil that's 400 capsules for 15 US, it's fair to say that they probably haven't done enough of the purification, and they haven't done enough of the processes in the manufacturing to really protect the oil from going rancid in the capsule, for example, or to clear some of the heavy metals from the oil itself, from the farmed fish, or from where they're sourcing their fish from. So this is where the quality of the supplements can actually be really a big thing. I think the other thing from a quality point of view is that there are brands that generally do take time to create a formula where the forms of the nutrients are exactly what the body would prefer. And I think, to speak on the plant-based question, to try and merge the two, with the plant-based diet, obviously we there's some conjecture in relation to B12, but look, I think when it comes to most people who are on a plant-based diet, B12 is a primary thing that should be tested on a regular basis. But just to touch on the DNA element of that, there are genuinely some people whose DNA cannot deal with man-made folate or folic acid, and that then affects their ability to deal with B12. So in the old cyanocobalamin, that's a lot which is kind of a normal form of B12 that pops up in a lot of formulas, may actually not be the right form for a lot of people with this particular DNA alteration. So what that can mean is that you can end up with right intentions, but the form of B12 that you're taking may not be the correct one. So to your point, there are companies that actually now just do their B12 as a methylated version, so that you can go and buy that with the peace of mind that the form of B12 that you need is the right one for you. And companies are actually taking that responsibility on for you to make those changes within those formulas. So this is where that quality really comes in. And I think for people who are plant-based, I think that's really important as well, because look, a lot of B12 supplements are made from lanolin. It's difficult to find proper plant-based supplements that are I think nowadays it's a little bit easier, but it was quite difficult to find something that was good quality. So I think it's, if you really care about what you eat, I think, it's important to do the same with your supplements as well.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit, Phil, to a couple of topics to do with, I guess the first thing is a lot of people are talking about intermittent fasting. And then the second question is really to do with protein, because protein is really the building blocks of everything, right? We need protein to feed our brain. We need protein to feed our muscles. Children need a lot of protein because they're so active. Could you talk a little bit about really, what's the general simplified idea behind intermittent fasting, and how do you personally feel about it? And if someone were to start, would you agree that it's a good way to sort of cleanse the body?
Sure. Look, I think the intermittent fasting, for clarification purposes, is an umbrella term for around about 50 different ways of fasting. So I think it's important to, I guess, clarify that in a sense, because there are different forms of intermittent fasting in the form of time-restricted eating, also what we call hypercaloric fasting, which is which has been made popular by Volta Longo with the fasting mimicking diet. I guess my first answer is fasting is good for you. I think that's I think we can all potentially agree on that. I think with the general impression of what intermittent fasting is, which is time-restricted eating or a restricted eating window, I think the one thing that I would caveat with fasting, and I think I see a lot of people maybe making this mistake on a regular basis, at least when they're coming and see me. I see a lot of people who have already started intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, before they see me. Something we touched on earlier is that people's exposure to nutrition is already low with 3 meals a day. And I think that can be fairly clear for most people. The way people are doing intermittent fasting is that if let's say your eating window is 12 to 8, which seems to be an average for a lot of people, what they're doing, what these people are doing is they're just skipping breakfast and then doing lunch and dinner within that window. And one of the things that I feel like is a big risk there is that you're actually reducing your exposure to nutrition by a third by skipping that meal. So if you've already got a reduced exposure to nutrition from 3 meals a day, from breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then all of a sudden you take one of those away, then you're actually really, just eating the same meals, lunch and dinner, you're actually going to get less nutrition. So one of the key things, if you do want to try intermittent fasting, one is go for it. It's really good for you. But I think one of the key things is that if you have a restricted eating window between 12 to 8, and look, the research is changing. I could be, we could learn something different in relation to that. But personally, I think we really need to make sure that during that 12 to 8 window, eat 3 meals. Get 3 meals worth of nutrition within that time-restricted window, because once again, over decades, if you don't have enough nutrition, your body is going to suffer in a functional and physiological way over that time. So I think just being mindful of how much nutrition you're getting, because fasting is essentially also a way that the body cleans house, but then the eating window is when the body gets its resources to do the rebuilding, to fuel the metabolism and do all these things. So once again, you need those resources. So I think just being careful with that with intermittent fasting is really, really important.
Yeah, the reason that I mentioned that is because I'm almost 50, but I've been struggling with, a little bit of extra fat for my entire life. And when I first intermittent fasting about 2 years ago, I was quite surprised with the results. It's not just with the weight loss and the increased energy. I found that my brain was working so well. So that was really, the bowels were good, the whole physical system was working better. But the mental clarity and the ability to just really concentrate and work in the flow, that was one of the biggest benefits that I came across, and I was quite surprised, actually.
I would second that. Last year I did a lot of, I really followed quite closely the fasting mimicking diet just to get an experience of it myself. And I have other people that have gone through different forms of fasting, like 3-day water fast or something like that. And this is actually one of the interesting things about it, is that a lot of people find that the mental element is actually partly because their blood sugar regulates. And this is a huge thing for the brain. So I would second that as well. From a peak performance point of view, looking into doing something, whether it's fasting or something along those lines to manage your blood sugar, will have a huge effect on your brain as well. You mentioned about protein. I think the key thing is that protein is just, once again, another form of currency. It's another denomination, and a denomination that's hugely important for your brain. Wow, with sun's just come out in Hong Kong. It's a hugely important denomination for your brain, but also for your nutrient transport as well. So once again, treating protein just like any other form of denomination of currency is always going to be really important, especially if you're exercising, like you said, for kids. It's a big one.
Okay, great. So I'd like to open it up for questions right now. Are there any questions for Dr. Phil? If there are, please could you type it into our chat box there, and our lovely Adela will be moderating today for the questions. If there are no immediate questions right now, I'd like to ask Dr. Phil one question that just came in. Could you share some motivations for healthy eating? Not everybody loves to eat salads or what we call rabbit food all the time. Do you believe on a cheat day, and how strict are you with the diet? I mean, some people still love their hot dogs and hamburgers, and how strict can we really be? Are we allowed to have a glass of wine?
Look, that's a great question. It really just depends on what you want, right? I think I really do believe in, as I said, in freedom from discipline. I think the one thing is that if you want freedom, I think you have to somewhat earn that freedom in a lot of ways. The other quote that I tend to use a lot, and I think, funnily enough, Margaret, I came up with this quote at one of our panels, would you believe? I think when we did this men's health panel. But I've run this quite a lot, everything in moderation, depending on the moderator. If you have trouble moderating yourself, then you've got to, this is where, the real questions need to be asked. I think you can live a life where you are able to do what you want. But the big issue is that I think, once again, even in the semantics of what we're talking about here, salad is rabbit food, but then it's also food for everyone. So there's an element of frame there, in that if you already see some healthy foods as negative or whatever, then good luck. It's a difficult kind of thing. So in some cases, fixing your relationship with these things. Interestingly enough, when it comes to salad, people can genetically have a problem in that their taste receptors are a bit towards the fact that they feel like certain foods taste like soap. So that can be a tough one. But everything in moderation, in relation to, if you want to do a cheat day, then what do you do the other 7 days? Most people have a cheat weekend and then one cheat day in the middle of the week. And look, it depends what you want. If we're talking about peak optimization, you're probably not going to get there. You're probably not going to see the higher level of performance from your body if you really do, kind of try and cheat the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, something that I've found kind of works well with us is just really being very very strategic and very smart about the type of cheat foods that we like. So
yeah, sure.
For example, so instead of buying frozen popples, which is refined sugar and food coloring, at home we might do frozen bananas. So frozen banana, the piece of fruit, also high in sugar, but at least you've got the fiber as well, right? And some of the nutrients there.
That's a
So,
really
and I
good
think
point.
with everything, yeah, and our lovely friend Susan shared with me the black cherries, the frozen black cherries, which are slightly slightly thawed, are also a great treat as well. So instead of eating like candy bars or chocolate, we've been doing a lot of the frozen organic black cherries, you know, six or seven pieces as a sweet treat, which is great. So it's just really clever about, you know, the type of food, making every single piece of food that goes in your mouth, really making it nutrient dense and making those calories count.
I think
So
I wanted to add just a small point on that. I mean, experientially, I mean, look, who knows if we're ever going to be able to go to a game again, or you know, things along those lines. But I think the other thing is that if food is experiential for you as well, like going and having a hot dog at a game, or in Australia it was eating a pie, you know, a football match or whatever, like you know, that's an experience. That's a little different from you sitting at home in front of Netflix and ordering in, right? And I think so. I think this is where people, I feel like, with their relationship with food, maybe miss out a little bit, because they feel like it's not just missing out on the food, but it's missing out on the experience. So I think that's another key, you know, another key point. But sorry, we've got a few questions, so I don't want to, I want to over answer some of these things.
yeah, I think it's great. I mean, in some of the previous events, we've discussed about awareness, being just being self-aware of where you're at in terms of your even your business skills or your confidence skills in business. When we talked about personal branding, even a lot of leaders have issues with stepping up in terms of their personal confidence. So I think the same really relates to nutrition, is really being self-aware. When something becomes a bit of a red flag, you might want to just pay attention to that, and then call someone like Dr. Phil for help. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Before it
there
becomes an
are
issue, right?
yeah, but there are a lot of psychological things wrapped up in food, and it really it's a lot more than anyone could ever imagine. And it is a very clean addiction. And as I said, it's normal. You go out for friends. You know, your friends will judge you. Your family will judge you. Your mother will say, "Why don't you eat my cake? I baked it for you especially." There are so many different ways that you can have, you know, psychological ties with food as well. So it is worth just really kind of delving into that as well. It isn't easy, and you need to be brave.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that I love about just sort of being able to reach out to an expert, someone who might be a little bit more objective, someone like Dr. Phil, is that they do have that objectivity, and they don't have that emotional or psychological attachment. So for our audience, for those of you who are kind of, you know, question mark about it, a few different things, you know, reach out to experts and get it cleared up. So now we're going to reach into the questions here. So
Actually, I have a private question. So one person is really interested in vitamin supplementation, and he was wondering, what vitamins do you think, Dr. Watkins, you think are necessary to supplement in your nutritional routine?
Sure. Thanks for the question. The key ones I always tend to move towards when I originally meet someone are a methylated B complex, magnesium in the form of magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate, and vitamin D. Vitamin D is a huge issue. People do not get enough sun. Even if they think they do, they don't. And it's a huge, vitamin D is not only deficient in a lot of people, but it is also a major part of the immune system. So I can give you a sense of what that means. A methylated B complex in the morning after breakfast, some magnesium after breakfast and dinner, and around about, obviously get your vitamin D tested through a health professional. But I think looking at around about 2,000 to 4,000 international units of vitamin D, obviously depending on your levels, a day is a prudent move to get started.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And I think vitamin D is so important, as you said, for the immune system, and especially with the current pandemic going on, I think it's a great way, to keep up.
There's some really, you're so right. There's some really, really interesting initial or preliminary research looking into vitamin D, and complications with COVID as well. So, you know, that research obviously will need to unfold a little bit further. But from a preliminary standpoint, it does look like vitamin D is a pretty key player in these things. So yeah, you're right on that one.
Absolutely. Awesome. So our next question comes from someone who's interested in the role of carbs in a diet and what influence it has for attaining peak performance.
Great question. So look, once again, this can be a difficult question to answer in a sense, because your DNA really does play quite a large role in how you deal with certain carbohydrates, fats, and things like that. So I think to caveat that first, I don't think carbohydrates as a food source are as bad as, you know, what they're made out to be. I do think that my personal preference is that carbohydrates, especially the heavier carbohydrates, are probably done more so from vegetables, from complex carbs. I think for peak performance, I don't feel as if you know, vegetables are ever going to be bad for you. I think it's important to probably differentiate between the carbohydrates when it comes to especially brain health. Eating lots of starches, especially, can, you know, kind of trigger certain neurotransmitter, you know, production that will give you that 3 p.m. slump, for example. Do you want to feel more relaxed in the evening? Maybe. Do you exercise a lot? Then, you know, once again, you might need some of those complex carbs or starches. So I think it does come down to a bit of a context. I'm sorry to give you an ambiguous answer on that. But I think the three main things that you want to consider are: how much are you exercising? When are you exercising? But also, what type of carbohydrates are you eating? If there's white flour, if it's white pastas or breads or something like that, that's going to really affect your brain, and it's probably going to affect your brain pretty quick. If it's vegetables, if you're serving up 4 serves of vegetables, that's probably going to be fine. So it might just be the portion size of the carbs as well. So a normal small size of you know, brown rice, for example, should be okay. You can get some fiber from there and other nutrients. So I think there needs to be a balanced view with carbohydrates and optimization, especially if you're exercising as regularly as some people are nowadays, you know, 4 to 5 times a week. But hopefully that answers the question. Once again, I'm sorry, it can be a little bit ambiguous in that one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Just in like my personal experience, it's so hard to find that balance, but that's totally right what you're saying. It's so crucial to get a balance in your diet, especially if you're having a consistent workout schedule in your daily life.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We tend to really move towards a binary view with the diet, and I think you know, that's going to be a difficult you know, a difficult one to do. I think the difficulty also is that, you know, to look towards the ketogenic diet, for example. You know, the ketogenic diet is prescriptive, so using it as a lifestyle, you know, it gets a bit lost in translation when it gets out into the public. You know, I remember seeing Dom D'Agostino speak in Australia, and you know, a lot of practitioners were asking him questions about the keto diet, and he's like, "Look, I'm a researcher. I research this to try and help people. I don't know whether or not, you know, we haven't done any research about lifestyle and all of these types of things, and that research is unfolding." So yeah, it is I think it's going to be less binary more and more as the research comes out.
Absolutely. Okay, so our next question comes from someone who wants to learn about the differences between the types of magnesium, so like glycinate and citrate.
Yeah, so look, I think the main difference here, once again, kind of comes down to quality. Magnesium oxide, which is you know, a commonly found form of magnesium in what I would refer to as maybe lesser quality magnesium supplements, generally is actually more used for smooth muscle relaxation, and that's a nice way to say it's better for people with constipation. So I think when you're looking at magnesium and its role for you know, for the brain and for energy production, and you know, you probably want to use a different form like the glycinate or the citrate to actually have an effect on these things. A good one for the brain that we haven't touched on magnesium-wise is magnesium threonate. That crosses the blood-brain barrier, and if you're looking at something specifically to unlock your performance, cognitively or something along those lines, then magnesium threonate is a good one. But I think for most people who are starting out, glycinate and citrate is a good place to start. It'll cover a lot of bases.
Awesome, thank you. That was very detailed. So our next question comes from, it's another carbs related question.
Sure.
So he's wondering if you had any thoughts on the retrogradation of carbs, so turning them into resistant starches by refrigeration as a way to reduce carb intake. And he's just wondering, is that a myth or is that an actual feasible way to reduce your carb intake?
I'm sorry, I don't know much about using that as a way to reduce your carb intake. I'm sorry. What I would say is that resistant starch provides a really important source of energy to your gastrointestinal cells that are lining the GI tract. And if you wanted to look it up a little bit further, this group of energy kind of providers are called short chain fatty acids. Generally, we recommend people have resistant starch in the form of, so to speak, on the process that you mentioned, to do that once or twice a week. But as I said, I can't comment on it being a reduction in carb intake, so to speak, because really it would be, in my mind, like, I guess just off the top of my head, it would still be absorbed in a similar way, but I would have to look into it. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that one.
Absolutely. And for everybody in the webinar, you can also check out Dr. Watkins' website. I'm going to link it in the messages nearing the end of this webinar, but you can always refer back to there for more info if you have more specific questions. So we have a question about intermittent fasting. So is it better to do long-term or as a short-term tactic for a weight loss or a mental reset?
That's a really good question. I think the second part of that question answers it in a lot of ways. The context at which what you're looking to achieve would dictate what type of fasting you would do. I think the big thing with weight loss I would offer you is that it needs to be done from lifestyle-oriented behaviors. I think one of the big things that I see with people is they do intermittent fasting for a period of time, whether that be 12 to 16 weeks, and they just stop. So any of the changes that they do get, both metabolically and from a body composition point of view, end up getting reversed, and in some cases, or quite a lot of cases, they get made worse than they were in the beginning. So I think this also speaks to the fact that there are many different types of intermittent fasting. So I think, once again, doing a lot of research is a big part of that. So taking some personal sovereignty, which is a big kind of theme for me in relation to learning more. So there are great people who you can follow. So Peter Attia, Rhonda Patrick, Walter Longo, as I mentioned earlier, he wrote a great book called The Fasting Mimicking Diet. I think researching forms of intermittent fasting to suit what you're trying to do would help you understand how to do it. I think for the majority of people, if you're trying to lose weight, do not skip a meal. Do intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. You'll probably find that things work out quite well. But do just understand that your body needs nutritional resources no matter what. You just